Howdy, howdy. Welcome to More Than a Refresh, the T3D Sessions. Today we have James Campbell, a command prompt resident engineer and one of our Citus experts. Please introduce yourself a little bit, James, and what are we talking about today?
Hi, I'm James Campbell, like you said, and I'm mostly a sysadmin, kind of a DBA, and a little of everything, whatever is needed. Today we're talking about security frameworks and how they basically become checkboxes and how to make, or just a few tips on how to make those actually meaningful and useful in reality.
Well, as someone who has sat on more than one conference call having to deal with compliance checklists from clients that are, and it's not the client's fault, right? It's, insurance and regulation and all that. So let's be very clear, but those compliance checkboxes are ridiculous. So share with us how you think we can make it better.
Right. So in reality, you get stuck with whatever security framework you're stuck with, and you have to manage to check the boxes at some point, or you don't pass your audits, whatever goes on. But there's a difference between having something that checks the box and having actual meaningful security.
I think that's a good point. As most people know, I've been doing this for 3 decades, and I have found over that time that lots and lots of organizations will check the boxes, but it doesn't mean anything. They're checking the boxes for insurance. They're checking the boxes for the boss who has to give it to the other boss. How can we make it meaningful without bankrupting everybody? Because obviously, it takes a lot of time and energy.
Yep. So there's several places where I think the main point is that you're going to spend a lot of time, like you said, in meetings. And I've been in meetings that have lasted for hours just talking about, for example, what actually does security at rest mean? And where does it end? Where does it matter? And a lot of places you get to the point where you've spent forever in a meeting and they say, we got disk encryption. Check the box. In reality, yes, your data is encrypted. It's at rest, it's encrypted, but a lot of the frameworks are very fuzzy on what at rest actually means. So instead of necessarily just focusing on can we check the box and then spending a lengthy argument trying to decide what's matter, it might be better to say, why does this checkbox exist? And for some of them, I probably couldn't explain why, or it applies to some niche little thing. But for something like encryption at rest, you say it's there to protect you from someone getting at your data. And a lot of places are in like Amazon Web Services. So the encrypted disks means that if someone gets a hold of the actual physical disk in Amazon's data center, they won't be able to use it.
Well,
Almost
it also
no
means
one's going to get that.
there's a little bit more to it than that, I would think, is because yes, obviously, if they get to the physical disk, which isn't a physical disk, it's a logical disk. There is no single physical disk, generally speaking, in the cloud, right? You're all in volumes running over NASs. But the more important in this scenario, and correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't it be that if the service is not running and somehow somebody accesses the volume physically or logically, that data is encrypted and protected?
Effectively, yes. But for most situations, your data is live, sort of, or at least the disk is mounted on a server. It's on the thing that's running. So the majority of your attack surface isn't someone getting access to the disk. It's someone running malicious code on your servers.
Yeah, it's getting access to the service.
It has to be that one. So if you think of terms of like common attacks, you get SQL injection attacks. If your database is on encrypted disks, that's cool. But while the database is running, do records that aren't being accessed count as at rest? That becomes a big debate usually. But if you think about it as say, all right, this control exists to protect data that's not currently being used from being accessed. So if you've got a table in there with all of your clients, their bank accounts, social numbers, whatever, and none of that data is encrypted in the database, then someone who manages to work a simple SQL injection attack on an unrelated thing could then start dumping the contents of that table. And so the question comes like, where does this security actually get you anything? And there's work to be put in to getting the encryption at rest, to filling the checkbox. But if a little bit more work and maybe less debate goes in, then you can get some meaningful encryption in a place, or meaningful security that really protects you from the heart of the matter.
It's interesting you say this. You use the term meaningful. And you would think after all this time, literally decades, that SQL injection would be a thing of the past, and that people would take even the most basic security seriously. But as you can read, I mean, I get personal emails all the time, not emails, letters, like good old fashioned USPS letter. By the way, if you would like to take place in the settlement from XYZ because they can't get their shit together and they have all your personal data, and people keep giving these companies money. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, security that involves public profile is actually quite complicated. It's not a simple thing, right? Because the world can access. So I'm not making light of that. But the problem is a lot of these lapses are due to the laziness or incompetence of the company itself. It's not due to a constant barrage of attacks that became more sophisticated, right? They're problems that have already been solved that they just don't want to take the time to deal with.
Yep. I say, or, it could all come down to one choice made in architecting a system, or that someone either is unfamiliar with the issues, or I'm kind of waiting to see what all the AI generated code's going to produce for the world.
Money for us, because it's going to be broken.
Yep, call us.
We'll help you.
Yep. But yeah, so there's a lot of examples of things like that. So the encryption at rest is one, and these things too. In these meetings discussing, like this one single control on preparing for an audit, you can go down a rabbit hole that never ends, because at some point in time something has to trust something, or else you might as well just shut the server down and lock it in a vault.
Right. That is correct.
There needs to be trust somewhere, and then it becomes a balancing act of figuring out where. And a lot of time can be wasted trying to pinpoint where that is, especially if it just ends up being you throw your hands up in the air and say, "Wait, you got disk encryption." Then that's just all wasted time. So, trying to keep the focus on what is the point to the control. It's great that you can check the box, but I want that to mean something.
Well, it's the thing that you're talking about here, if we boil it down, is the standard problem of people running on the freeway. And what I mean by that is you should always start the meeting or the compliance check or the question, right? Whatever it is, the first question you ask is not what solutions do we have? It is what is the problem we're trying to solve? And you work off of that, because you start from zero always. If you start from 4, you end up going in circles.
Yep. But in this regard, as long as you make sure that the problem isn't how do we check the box, the problem is how do we make sure that we're safe.
No, agreed. So, yeah, that's exactly my point, is that if you say, how do we check the box, you're starting at 4.
Exactly.
Because you're not asking yourself, what is the problem we're trying to solve? Yeah.
Insane. And so along those lines, there's several other things that fall into the same sort of category. The big ones that we also run into occasionally are stuff like MFA, of the whole concept of the modern idea is you go for that zero trust model, where you assume that even within your network, anything compromised, you don't want it to be able to spread laterally. So you don't have the old style of perimeter security where you do like SSL offloading and stuff where you say once you're inside the network, you're safe type thing. It's like you can say, yes, we use MFA for the box, but if that ends at the border, then are you really using it type thing? And that's really not what the whole thing was about.
It gets difficult though, because you do have to balance the security versus the convenience. If you make if you make your utility or your tool, whether it be a bank access or whether it be even client Redmine access, right? If you make it too complicated, people won't use it because people inherently, I don't care how driven you are, seek convenience. And I run into this all the time because nowadays, like I had to send some money. It wasn't a lot of money, but I had to send some personal money to a vendor, and I used Zelle. Okay, you send it to Zelle. Well, it was a higher amount than I normally spend, so they locked it, which I appreciate because I don't want someone taking my money that shouldn't have it. But then I was on the phone for 45 minutes, not on hold, with an agent and answering questions to confirm that I am me. That's not useful. At that point, I might as well have just sent a check and hope it worked out.
Indeed. And that's where these controls can, it's definitely is a balancing act that it can go both ways, that you can either just throw your hands up and go for the least effort that gets you the box, or you can go all in and say, okay, for every single authentication that happens inside the system, we need MFA. And then you end up down this endless rabbit hole again of saying, where does this end? Because there are service accounts that need to talk to other systems and these things. And there are some places where you say, all right, this security buys me absolutely nothing. This wasn't something that needs protecting anyway. So in that regard, it's also nice to have just an inventory to work off of. So go and say, all right, where are all the places that authentication happens? Now we can go through them and say which ones actually matter, which ones are going to benefit or increase our security by giving MFA, and which ones are just going to be a headache for everyone working with the system.
All right. Well, now we're out of time, but I do want to say this. You made a good point about, let's figure out where we actually need the MFA or the security or where the trust can be. But the great assumption there is that the people on the meeting have any idea how their app works.
That's very true.
And with that, that's another More Than a Refresh T3D Sessions. Thanks, James, for joining.